Wisconsin and its business law section. She has served as president of the North American Securities Administrators Association, which is the oldest international organization devoted to investor protection. And of course, she speaks frequently on the subjects of security regulation as well as the prevention of financial fraud against older investors. Before beginning her career in public service, she was an attorney with a large regional bank and graduated from the American Bankers Association's National Trust School. She was selected as one of the top 25 Wisconsin women super lawyers and as a Wisconsin super lawyer in 2006 to 2009. She has her JD degree from the University of Wisconsin Law School. Please welcome Patricia.
Thanks so much, Paul. This is a first for me. I've never been to 100th State before. I've certainly never walked over here in a monsoon before, and I've never been photographed, filmed while doing a presentation on crowdfunding. So, so thanks for having me. I'm going to start tonight by talking about what is crowdfunding. And of course, whenever you're talking about crowdfunding, you have to ask the group, what is crowdfunding? Do you know what it is? So what we're talking about, though, is obviously something different. We're talking about equity crowdfunding. And equity crowdfunding specifically under the Wisconsin securities law. That is crowdfunding. First of all, under the new Wisconsin law that Paul referred to, it was Wisconsin Act 52, was being debated about this time last year and was signed into law by Governor Walker in November of last year. But here's what's important. The crowdfunding provisions, the crowdfunding exemption under Wisconsin securities law just became effective 3 weeks ago. So just on June 1st, I guess that's 4 weeks ago yesterday. So we've only had it working here for 1 month. And so I want to tell you a little bit about that kind of crowdfunding, what it isn't, what it is, and how you can take advantage of it. The first question, what it isn't. It's not a government program, and I think most of you probably know that, but a lot of people who call and want to know, what about this new program that the government instituted? Well, it isn't that. It isn't a grant program. It isn't something that you apply for and then get something in return. What it is a registration exemption under Wisconsin securities law. And finally, how you take advantage of it, we'll talk about that next. But basically, the basic rule is the entity raising capital is the issuer, and I'm assuming that's you. That people in this room are probably, a lot of you, interested in raising capital to fund a business venture. How many of you have thought about doing that, have a good idea that you'd really like to raise money from equity investors? Anybody here? So it looks like about half of the people in this room, and I'm going to say it's about 10 people, are admitting to wanting to raise capital through investors so that they can fund a business deal. And so I'm going to call the issuer you for purposes of this presentation this evening. And the other thing that is characteristic of all crowdfunding deals, not just equity crowdfunding, but it's got to be made through a website. So that's sort of your gateway to crowdfunding. We call it in Wisconsin, under the Wisconsin exemption, an internet site operated by an internet site operator, and that's critical to the deal. You can't do crowdfunding under the securities law without the internet site operator. Okay, fundraising limits. This is a little bit different from most exemptions under the Wisconsin securities law. Let me tell you a little bit about the securities law, first of all. Paul told you that our job at the securities division is to protect investors. That's the reason why we exist. And there's one securities division, securities department in every state. And in every state, before you sell securities to investors, you have to do one thing, and that is register your securities, unless you have an exemption. And today there are lots of exemptions under the securities law in Wisconsin and elsewhere. But what's different about this one is it doesn't limit the number of people who can invest in your deal. You can have an unlimited number of investors. But here is what is limited. You can sell only $1 million in your equity securities. Here, think stock. It's going to be stock. Unless you have an audit. And if you have an audit, you can sell up to $2 million in equity securities. And then each investor, you're limited as to the amount of money that you can take from each investor when they buy your stock. And the limit per investor is $10,000 unless they're an accredited or certified investor. Now, somebody is probably familiar with the term accredited investor. It's something that's been around for a long time, since the adoption of Regulation D under the federal securities law, so more than 30 years. But it's basically, these are people who kind of stand apart from the crowd. An accredited investor is somebody who has basically net worth of $1 million after that, without counting the principal residence of the person. A certified investor, though, has anybody heard about this concept? So, very few of you know about the concept of the certified investor. This is a Wisconsin-only term, and it is another group of investors that stand outside the crowd. These are people with net worth. They're sort of a mini accredited investor. They have net worth of not less than $750,000. But for purposes of calculating their net worth, you actually can take into account the equity interest that they hold in their homes. So it's a lot lower standard. And if you take money from those two kinds of investors, you don't count that money against the $1 or $2 million that you can raise, and you don't count those investors' amounts in the $10,000 cap that they may invest. Another feature of the Wisconsin crowdfunding exemption is it's intrastate. It's entirely intrastate. So if you are not located in the state of Wisconsin, if you have a business and you are incorporated under Illinois law, you're out of luck. This is available only to Wisconsin businesses, and it's available for offers and sales only to investors in Wisconsin. And it has to be done through an internet site that's organized and authorized to do business in Wisconsin. And organized would have to be a corporation, limited liability company, or other kind of entity actually organized under Wisconsin law. And your entire offering, remember, being the issuer, so the issuer's entire offering must be done only through the internet site. Okay, so I said we talk about how you take advantage of the new exemption, and obviously if you're looking to use an internet site that's registered in Wisconsin, how do you make sure that they did that? Well, one way is to look at our website, and you'll see that later. We'll actually walk you through a page on the website. The internet site operator needs to file a registration statement on our website. They need to pay a fee of $100. They need to maintain certain records about who's investing and the time frame for those investments. And then they have to make quarterly reports on an ongoing basis during the continuation of your offering of securities. Here's what the internet site operator cannot do. They can't give investment advice, so they can't go out and look for investors for you. They can't make solicitation of purchasers, so they can't actually appear at an event and say, here, buy this pizza business securities. That's something that they're not permitted to do. They can't take compensation that's based on the success of your offering. So they're not going to be compensated on whether or not you actually reach the minimum offering that you said you would. And they must not be subject to what's called the bad actor disqualifier. In other words, they can't have marks on their records that show that they are dishonest. So here we're not talking about people who've had, possession of marijuana kinds of offenses, but these are serious financial industry kinds of offenses on their records and court judgments. So how to begin? How would you begin as an issuer crowdfunding? If you want to raise money from investors in Wisconsin, how do you begin? First of all, you're a Wisconsin business. You have to file your notice. It's called a notice, at least 10 days before you start making your offering. What's a notice? We'll actually walk through that, and you can take a look at what is required, but it's a very basic amount of information about your business and yourself. You have to pay a $50 fee. You have to provide the disclosure document that you're actually going to use to solicit investors, but that disclosure document is going to remain confidential under Wisconsin law. And then you also have to find a bank in Wisconsin, organized and chartered under Wisconsin law, that is going to hold your money in escrow until you reach the minimum proceeds. Actually, I misspoke. It's not just a bank. It could also be a credit union that's organized under Wisconsin law. And they have to hold the money until it can be released to you after you raise the minimum proceeds. All right, so I told you we'd actually walk you through the DFI website. I'm going to start out with these screenshots, and let me tell you first of all that the reason all of this is here, I told you that the law was just passed last November with a delayed effective date. The reason we have all this here is that we have a really excellent technology staff, and I can only imagine the number of hours. It looks so simple. It really looks like no effort at all. I can tell you that we were meeting with our tech staff on, to begin with, a monthly basis, but eventually several times a week, just to make sure that on June 1st, we had all of this up. So if you were looking to file on that date, the site would have been available. And I don't have the technology staff here today because you'd really like to meet them, but I really do want you to meet the other two people on the crowdfunding policy team for DFI, and they are Deb Fabritz, who's sitting at the edge of the table over there, and I'm sorry, if you're watching this on YouTube, you won't be able to see her, and Joe Friesen, who looks as if he might be part of our crowdfunding policy team, right? Yeah. And so, okay, so what do you need to do? The exemption, for example, I'm not trying to turn you into securities lawyers, but we could do that tonight. So 551-202-16, that's the exemption. I'm sorry, 26, that's the exemption for crowdfunding. You don't have to register, you don't have to produce volumes of information. Probably you don't. In many cases, you're not going to have to hire an accountant. You're not going to have to prepare an elegant business plan with the help of consultants, and many people are going lawyerless. But you do have to make the notice filing that we talked about. And these directions, this list of instructions actually tells you what you need to do in order to make your filing. For example, you need the name of the issuer of the securities. You need to talk a little bit about yourself. You need to talk about the financial institution where your investor funds are going to be deposited. And then you have to pay the fee. All of this is going to be done online. We also ask you to give us your disclosure document, which, as I said, will remain confidential, but you can upload it using these instructions. Okay. So here's what it looks like. The name of the issuer, your address, the website address of the issuer, the contact person, because we need to know if there are questions, who we would reach out to, the address, the phone number, the email address, and then the documents to be uploaded. There are just two. One is the disclosure document that you're going to use when you are actually looking for investors, and the other one is the escrow agreement with the Wisconsin Chartered Financial Institution. And then you make certain basic statements that show us that you qualify for use of the exemption. It tells us that you're a business entity organized under Wisconsin law. It tells us that you believe the transaction meets the requirements for the federal exemption for intrastate offerings. Remember, we said that the issuer has to be you, have to be organized under Wisconsin law, and your internet site operator has to be here in Wisconsin, and your investors have to be here in Wisconsin. You believe that's true, and then you say that you're not going to exceed the limits on the offering that are provided under Wisconsin law. And until you actually click all of those, the notice won't be accepted. And then there are, each one of the requirements for use of the exemption is actually set forth separately, and you have to say, yeah, it's like buying something on Amazon. You just have to make sure that you tell them you don't want the special shipping, and you're good. Other requirements of the issuer: you have to provide your disclosure document to the investors, but again, that disclosure document, which tells a lot about your business plan, how long you've been in existence, tells you a lot about the people actually behind the deal. All of that you need to file with us, but you don't have to make it public. You need not to have made any prior offering within the prior 12 months. Now, that's because if you did, you'd have trouble under federal securities law, and you don't want that. You can't be subject to the bad actor disqualification that we talked about, and you have to know that you're going to be reporting on a quarterly basis to your investors. I'm not giving you any examples from Wisconsin. We will look at the website and I can show you those, but there are exemptions in a number of states that are quite similar to Wisconsin's, but you know what? Wisconsin's was adopted first, and most of the exemptions that have been adopted since Wisconsin's in November of last year are based more or less on the Wisconsin law. So the same principal elements for the crowdfunding registration exemption are the same. Michigan has one of those. It's called the MILE. I think that's a more creative name than crowdfunding exemption. And one of the first issuers to file under the Michigan law is Tecumseh Brewing Company. And Bohemian Guitars was one of the first to file under the Invest Georgia exemption. We have resources under wdfi.org. Has everybody looked at our website to see what's available there? Okay. Here, I heard a no. So here's what's there. You can search for issuers. You can see the names of the issuers that have actually used the crowdfunding exemption or filed to use the crowdfunding exemption to date. You can search for internet sites that are registered, and there are a couple. Or excuse me, there is one. Yeah, there are two. Two, Joe. Two, one.
Sorry, yes.
One.
Yes.
One registered and one pending. We have FAQs about, I haven't organized yet, or I'm in Mississippi, can I still use your exemption, or what is the fee, as well as a number of other policy questions that we've had a number of times. Those are in the FAQ section. We have the pages that you would use for instructions and then actually doing your online filing, and that is the web address. Issues that we've encountered so far. In Wisconsin, it seems that it's difficult to find an escrow agent. I told you that you need to have an escrow agent in order to take advantage of the exemption, and so far there's been some difficulty in finding a financial institution, a credit union or a bank that really is looking to take on this kind of obligation. We also have a little bit of, we've had a lot of questions about what website can I use, because some of them are very specialized. Some of the internet sites are quite specialized as to the kind of offering that they are specializing in. Questions. I introduced you to Deb, to Joe, and me, and you'll all have this PowerPoint, right? Everybody will have access to the PowerPoint, I think?
Yeah.
So when you look at that, you'll have all of our contact information, both email and phone. And I also want to point out the Examiner of the Day hotline. You can get an answer, even if you can't reach one of us, you can always leave a voicemail for us, and